Hi all. The Colson EventDate game was interesting to many of you, and someone called GoCool009, who's only subscribed to the channel about an hour ago, has mentioned also for me to check out Aronian against Anand. I did check it out. It's actually a very sweet, short win, and there weren't too many decisive games in that very high level Bilbao Masters tournament, so I thought we should check it out. And actually, you know, all these war zones I've been playing on ChessCube to do with H2 or the H7 weakness, to be honest, I've been feeling a kind of insecurity. Is it like, you know, cheap chess? The king's castle's on the king's side, and you know, is it really actually cheap to go, you know, if you're white, to go for H7? Is it cheap for black to go to H2, or is it effective? And you know, of course, war zones you want to try and win as quickly as possible. And we saw actually in the Colson game that actually H7 was an issue, even at the very high levels of chess. The same fundamental idea that H7 or H2 is weak is still present. It's just that there's a mask, another layer of the onion to peel, that sometimes they're subtle. They take away the third pawn. You know, say that pawn goes there, you know, or if this pawn goes there, these two are weaker. H2 will be weaker. You take away that third defensive pawn, and either the H2 or H7 squares are going to be weaker. That's the theory that you'll see from, if you review the Colson EventDate game, and we're going to have an even more vivid demonstration of this concept. And not only that, but this idea of a rook, you know, switching across via the fourth rank. It seems, but in both games, the fourth rank is key, you know, potentially in some variations, for a rook targeting, say, H7. So if you were black, it would be, you know, your fourth rank for a rook coming like this. So that's enough of all the fancy arrows. Let's have a look at this game. So D4. So keep in mind that one part of peeling the onion would be to get rid of the third pawn, okay? Because then H7 will be more vulnerable. So knight F6. We have here Anand playing black, and he plays as though it's going to be an Imzo Indian, but knight F3 is played. So we have actually D5. So kind of, is it going to be Queen's Gambit declined, or is it going to be transposing into something else? Actually, it transposes into Queen's Gambit accepted. And I think this is called the Vienna variation. So E4 and now Bishop B4. Okay, so with this pin, you know, black is putting more pressure on E4, and it seems difficult for white to defend it. Now, this is why actually, if you're going to learn opening theory, you must be very, very comfortable with positional sacrifices, because they are an essential part of opening theory. It's the only way to play the position. How do you defend the pawn here on E4 without playing a passive move? You actually have to sacrifice a pawn here and make it into a gambit, and that's exactly what Levon does. He just gambits basically a pawn. He plays bishop takes C4, and Anand takes that pawn on E4. And now we see very relaxed play, you know, take another pawn, take more material, he's saying to Anand. You know, he just castles. And you might want to have concrete proof, you know, is it really okay to let C3 go here? Well, in the game, Anand, you know, he retreated his knight, but I'll give you some proof of the pudding. So knight takes C3, what would have happened? Some analysis from earlier. White could take, offer the C3 pawn. So what are we now? We're 2 pawns down. 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2 pawns down. On the bright side, you know, black's king is still in the centre. Do we want to play bishop A3, or do we just want to move the rook? Remember, we're 2 pawns down. You might be tempted for an exchange sack. Actually, let's add a kibitzer. I don't think bishop A3 is a particularly good move, actually. Probably not. Black could probably just take the exchange here and be better. If he can wriggle out of this, he's going to be better. Maybe he can. So apparently that's better. But the way for white to actually play this from an engine perspective to be okay is simply in this position, believe it or not, 2 pawns down, to let black just castle, actually. Just play rook b1. Let black castle if needed. If black castles, so queen d3, getting a tempo on the bishop. Bishop goes back. And now look, h7's a target. There's no defensive knight on f6. So the crude knight g5 might actually be a good move, as you see here. But also rook d1. But say knight g5, g6. Let's follow this one. Queen h3, h5. And now look, g4, advantage to white. So much for the cheap idea of going for h7. We're seeing here 2 pawns down. That g4 is actually effective. Look, the king is like the weakest piece on the board, basically. So bear that in mind, even at the super GM level. Obviously, taking there's mate. What about queen takes d4, you might ask? Just carry on ploughing through the black king position. If black really wants to take, he's going to be mated her after hg. There's no way of defending that without giving up the queen. And in this position, let's try a defensive. Try queen f6. And there's a resource here for the queen f6. Knight h7. Winning the exchange. Because if takes, we're bringing the king out. Check. Queen h7. So basically, what we're discovering here is, you've got to have this mindset of the positional sacrifice, and it's going to lead basically. The positional sacrifice is like a gambit, but it's not as if you're going to memorize millions of gambits. You just got to be aware, unless you do want to learn tons of these games, that you've got to be relaxed about material to play like this. So being relaxed about material and even letting black castle, just going for h7 there, as that variation showed. But here Anand played knight f6. Okay, so he's not that greedy. He's content to be just 1 pawn up. And he's got his defensive knight, which defends h7, so that's cool. So surely he's not going to be attacked. Surely h7 is not going to be a problem in this game. Okay, well, white plays check, forcing knight c6 to protect the bishop. Now bishop g5. Bishop goes back to unpin the knight. But now white forces through d5. He forcefully takes on f6. Very forcing move, giving up the dark square bishop. It's not every time that forcing moves are going to be good. But here, d5. Okay, what's the problem, you might ask? Surely black can get away with this. He takes on d5. He even allows the check, because we've got bishop e6. Surely this is okay. But red alert. Onion peeling time. The first layer of the onion. Get rid of this third pawn. Once you get rid of that third pawn, h7 is going to be fatally weak. That's the idea. Bishop takes d5. And you've guessed it, the third pawn is going to be wrenched away from black's king side. Bishop takes e6. We have it here. F takes e6. Now, what's another thing we picked up recently from some engine post-mortem analysis about weaknesses? If the opponent's got a weakness like an isolated queen's pawn, you don't have to go through this routine, restrain, blockade, destroy. You don't have to. Actually, you can apply more pressure to that weakness and try and get the opponent's pieces in passive positions, then go for their king. That's another way of winning the war, rather than trying to win a little battle, trying to just pick up this pawn immediately. You'd just be winning a little battle to restore material. Why does white just want to restore material when he can go for the king? We've got the third pawn wrenched away anyway. So we'll go for h7. So how does Levon do this? So he attacks the queen, and he's in no hurry. He could have played rook takes e6. That's an engine recommendation. And he could have had this position, equal on material and slightly better, because he's still got some pressure points. He's got b7 as a pressure point. This variation shows, he might be better here. And in fact, there's still some light square weaknesses to exploit. White might be slightly better, but he went for a more ambitious variation, basically trying to win the war, not the battle. So try and get the black pieces passive. So what did he do? Well, once he saw this weak e6 pawn, he started just piling on the pressure. So rook a d1, now knight e4. So there's various threats you might consider, like knight c5, then e6. So knight c5 is particularly, looking quite painful, actually. So maybe this next move from Anand is designed against knight c5. So he plays queen e7, guarding c5. Queen b3, hitting both b7 and e6. So the torture begins. Rook ab8, defending b7. Okay, and you might think, right, how is white going to get to that h7 pawn? After all, the third pawn's been wrenched away. How do we do it here? Take on f6. So if g takes, there's obviously rook takes e6. So rook takes f6 is virtually forced. You don't want to take with the queen, because that would be particularly nasty. Rook takes e6, and it looks as though queen f7, that looks as though that's asking for trouble. Not knight g5, queen f2, so let's just add a check here. Here in this position, queen f7, actually there's a real crushing move, which, okay, 10 seconds if you don't want to check the analysis. Not knight g5, rook d7, ouch. So if takes, what's going on here? Check, winning the queen. Knight g5 would just fell here to queen takes f2. Actually, and white gets mated with queen f1. So avoid that. Yeah, that's a bit of a pitfall. So basically, in this position, we're nearly through the game. That's why I'm going in detail on these moves. Actually, black doesn't last much longer from this position. Now we get the crudity, which I'm starting to be ashamed of in my Warzone games. Going for the most obvious, blatant pawn, one of the closest pawns to the king on the far right of the board, the h7 pawn, knight g5. But it's effective. Why is it effective? Why should such a crudity at this level be effective? He's targeting e6 and h7. Okay. So how does black defend this? And then tried queen b4. What is actually the engine evaluation here? If knight d8, maybe that's one of the better moves. Rook e5, and white can carry on putting the torture on black. Would be slightly better here in this position. So knight c5 gets the evil knight c5 in, and it is slightly better apparently. He's hitting the rook now. So say that the rook is protected. And we get a position, maybe this is what Anand should have played. Maybe this is a blunder now what he played, actually, queen b4. So in this position, it seems knight d8 is one of the strongest, but he played queen b4. Okay. And now forget queen takes b4. See, engines, they don't care if the queens come off. They have no emotion about it. They're like Spock, obviously. To us, we want to keep the queens on because the queens make the game more exciting, having the queens on. So keep the queen on and threaten mates. Yes, why not? Okay. So you might think, well, black has the defensive stroke attacking resource, rook g6. Black does have, but now we have this cunning rook maneuver idea to target h7, together with some other nice ideas. So rook e4, gaining a tempo. Queen moves, and now we have h4, brilliant move, h4, and you see why the third pawn wrenched away makes it more difficult for black to defend. If the third pawn was an f7, maybe f6 would be playable just about, but here actually, imagine f6, there'll be knight takes h7 potentially in h5, but here the queen's on h5, so h5 is not a major issue. After h4, what we have is actually generated the threat of rook takes e6, because rook takes e6, queen h7 is dangerous. And then played rook e8, but just to demonstrate that, let's give a sort of null move experiment, a6 here. I think it's rook e6, which is a killer move here. So say rook takes e6, check, and it's actually a mate in 4. Check and check. Very direct, based on h7, but it wins the game. It's a vulnerability. It really is. So what did Anand do? He has to defend against that. So he plays rook e8. So the idea is not h5. Remember, the queen's on h5. If you thought the idea was of knight takes or h5, it's not. It's rook e6. And that theme is picked up on very shortly again. We have rook d7 now. Okay, so white has got loads of pressure here for the pawn. He's only a pawn down, rook on the 7th, and now black moves his h-pawn. Finally moves it, h6. But we have now a beautiful tactical idea that the back row is weak in some of these variations. In fact, this knight which is protecting the back row could be potentially lured away. Aronian finds a technically very good move. In fact, Houdini, I think, favours this move over any other here in the position. He plays b4. So b4 is not what you might think it could be about discovering an attack on the rook with rook takes b4. It's not about that. Here's a variation from earlier. If rook takes b4 here, trying to win material, black doesn't take on b4, but plays actually the counter sack, rook takes g5, and black is not that bad here in this position. No, the idea after knight takes b4 would be something quite stunning. If I give you 10 seconds, can you see it? 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, remember the knight has been lured away from d8. That's the clue. Rook takes e6, offering the queen. You know, if knight takes, then we've got, you know, rook takes and its mates because the king can't exit out. If rook takes here, then we've got, you know, a mate like this. So there's no way, nothing black can do in that variation. So that's the idea of b4. Very nice idea. And then plays queen f5, and we have basically the same idea. So can you guess the move in this position? White plays rook takes e6 again. End of game. It's undermining the protection of f5. If rook takes e6, then queen takes f5. Let's add all the choices. Let's look at all the choices. So rook takes e6, we just take on f5. Takes, this is no good. Check. This is very unpleasant for black. h5, it's just massively better for white. If rook takes g5, protecting the queen, then we take on e8. Then here, the simplest is just taking on f5. Just the exchange up. It's going to double on the 7th, and that's it. Massive advantage. So rook takes e6 is an absolute crusher here. It's the crushing move. So tactically, a very precise game. If we look at this b4 move, you'll see in this position, b4 only comes up at a certain depth. 15, we're at depth 15, and it's still recommending rook e2 or rook e3. So this is a very tactically amazing move played. b4. Depth 17, depth 18, we're still looking at rook e3. This is Houdini. And I think it does change its mind soon to b4. Well, that's what I thought I saw earlier anyway. But why is rook e3 a strong move? If we follow that, knight e7, knight takes e6. Oh dear, it seems as though rook e3 might actually be, if I put foot in mouth, rook e3 might actually be another very good alternative here, not just b4. If we add another branch, b4's like, it climbs up. You see that climbing up? It's 2.25 now. See, now at depth 19 we see b4. So there was another option to be taken seriously of rook e3. So say knight e7, protecting the rook. And this is getting very complicated actually, because you might think, well, what if, you know, rook e7, does that work? But actually knight e7, if rook e7, queen g6, hg, and it's only a small advantage for white. So actually in this position, knight takes e6, and then knight f5, and this is a big advantage for white. But Aronian's move is actually more technically precise because of some resource in this line, which means actually that the move b4, it's having to recalculate. It might have to recalculate. No, it's stored its previous analysis. But at depth 20, b4 is actually the killer move, and it was played against Anand. So it's like playing against Houdini, unfortunately, in this game. And queen b5 doesn't really help. a4, kicking the queen. So the queen's going to be kicked to f5 anyway. Where else does the queen go here? If it goes to b6, right, this is another alternative. Even in this position, actually, we should examine this. If the queen went out of the way, what is the key problem here? The key problem is simply rook e3. It seems, just targeting that rook. That rook needs to be defended. Embarrassingly, the king can't come to defend the rook. If knight e7 here, I think it's not rook takes e7 that's the problem, it's rook takes e6. And again, look, we're really highlighting the weaknesses of h7, because rook takes e6 is leading to a mate. So that's forking queen and rook there, quite embarrassingly. Just winning the queen, basically. So that's why queen b6 isn't the most attractive square for the queen. It can be targeted. So simply rook e3 is a killer move, or even rook e2, same effect. How is black defending g6? If he moves the rook out of the way, it's just mate in 2, clearly. So basically, you know, there's a common theme in the last two games which we've checked out, is that basically when you castle on the king side, you have got a natural built-in weakness in your fortress and Achilles heel, the h pawn, whether it's h2 or h7. It's just peeling the onion. In your longer games, how would you peel that onion to get to that weakness? Getting rid of that third pawn. How do you get rid of that third pawn? Well, it can start off like this, where you force an early bishop e6, you wrench away that pawn, and then instead of just getting your material back straight away, you torture the opponent to put the opponent's pieces in defensive positions. And when you do that, forget exchanging queens, you go for that Achilles heel. So that h7's being targeted here, being forced to defend with rook g6. Rook e4, key move to enable h4, otherwise h4 would just been taken there by the queen. So the queen's pushed out of the way. It's still providing some defensive support here on against h5s. But now the two rooks, the queen and knight, are doing a fantastic job here tactically. Just need something to finish black off, and that happens to be the most high precision move happens to be played, b4, leading to potentially a queen sack in the knight takes b4 line, with rook takes e6 as we've just seen. So there's all these defensive tries, but this just led to the spectacular rook takes e6, end of game. Wow. So just shows castling isn't a guarantee of king safety. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.